This man just ordered 280 women to be sewn into sacks and thrown into the sea. He's 32 years old. He rules the most powerful empire on earth, and he's completely insane. But here's what will blow your mind about this story. This same man once ruled so brilliantly that he saved the Ottoman Empire. He launched successful military campaigns, negotiated peace treaties, and personally walked the streets to understand his people's problems. He was a genius. So what turned a brilliant ruler into a monster who drowned 280 innocent women? How do you go from saving an empire to nearly destroying it in just 3 years? The answer involves the most twisted family betrayal in history. His own mother, who spent 33 years protecting him from assassins, ultimately becomes the one who orders his execution. The woman who saved his life hundreds of times personally signs his death warrant. But that's not even the craziest part. For 17 years, he was locked in a golden cage, watching his brothers get murdered one by one, knowing he was next. Every morning, he woke up wondering if today would be his last. Imagine living like that for 17 years, every single day. You'll discover the exact moment when brilliance turned to madness, when one execution, just one, sent him spiraling into paranoid delusions that would cost 100 lives. You'll see how a 24-year war started because of one man's broken mind. By the time you finish this story, you'll never look at power the same way again. Because what I'm about to show you proves that the most dangerous prisons aren't made of iron bars. They're made of gold. This is happening in every palace, every boardroom, every seat of power around the world. The same golden cages, the same isolation, the same madness. This is the rise and fall of Ibrahim I, the genius who became a monster, the savior who became a destroyer, the man whose own mother had to kill him to save the world. Welcome to the most disturbing royal story ever told. And I guarantee you've never heard anything like this before. It starts with an 8-year-old boy standing in a room that will become his prison for the next 17 years. To understand how a man could order the drowning of 280 innocent women, we have to go back to where it all began. Back to when Ibrahim was just 8 years old, standing in a room that would become his prison for the next 17 years. They called it the cafes, the golden cage, a room designed to be perfect yet poisonous. Iznik tiles depicted cypress trees and climbing vines, creating a mock paradise for those who could never see real gardens. The windows were stained glass that turned harsh sunlight into something soft and dreamlike, as if the princes were living at the bottom of a beautiful, suffocating sea. This was the Ottoman solution to centuries of royal fratricide. Instead of killing potential heirs, they would simply lock them away. House them in luxury, yes, but imprison them nonetheless. Feed them the finest foods, dress them in silk, surround them with books and art. But never let them leave. Never let them see the real world. Never let them understand it. And into this golden prison in 1623 walked 8-year-old Ibrahim. His mother, Kösem Sultan, was no ordinary woman. A former Greek slave who had clawed her way to become the Ottoman Empire's power behind the throne. She had protected Ibrahim during his early years, but when his older brother Murad became Sultan in 1623, even her influence couldn't spare her younger son from the cafes. The system demanded it. Royal brothers had to be contained. So Ibrahim, barely old enough to understand what was happening, was led into that beautiful, terrible room and told he might never leave. For 17 years, this was Ibrahim's reality. 17 years of luxury without freedom, of safety without security, of life without living. He watched the world through colored glass. He learned about power from books written by dead men. He understood love only through poetry, war only through paintings. And one by one, he watched his brothers die. Murad IV wasn't just paranoid, he was systematic in eliminating threats. Prince Bayezid, executed. Prince Suleiman, strangled. Prince Qasim, murdered in his sleep. Each death was justified as reasons of state, political necessity, the survival of the empire. Ibrahim knew he was next. Everyone knew he was next. He lived every day knowing that Murad needed only a bad mood, only a whispered suggestion from an advisor, only a moment of political insecurity to sign his death warrant. The toll was devastating. Ibrahim developed chronic headaches that left him writhing in agony. His body grew weak, his skin pale from filtered sunlight. But worse was the mental damage. He became paranoid, jumping at shadows, talking to himself because he had no real friends. Modern analysis suggests he may have developed severe trauma from decades of isolation and terror. The historical records show a man slowly disintegrating under pressure no human mind was meant to bear. But here's the tragic irony. Ibrahim wasn't born broken. Court documents from his early imprisonment show a young man who wrote poetry, studied languages, dreamed of the world beyond his windows. He had potential. He could have been great. The system didn't break him all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, it cracked him slowly, like ice forming on a pond, until the surface could no longer hold. When Murad finally died in February 1640, courtiers came to the cafes with trembling hands. "Your Majesty," they said, kneeling before the stained glass windows, "you are Sultan now." But 17 years of imprisonment had taught the prince one lesson above all: trust no one. He barricaded himself in his rooms, convinced this was another test. "Show me the body," he demanded through the locked door. Only when they dragged Murad's corpse to his window did he emerge from his prison. For 4 years, the broken prince proved everyone wrong. He wasn't just competent, he was brilliant. He launched the successful Azov campaign in 1642, recapturing the strategic fortress from the Cossacks. He negotiated the Treaty of Zoni with Austria, securing the empire's northern borders. He implemented economic reforms and personally inspected markets in Constantinople, seeing how his people truly lived. His correspondence shows genuine concern for governance and detailed attention to provincial administration. The broken bird, it seemed, could still fly. But Kösem Sultan faced a complex challenge. She had spent decades protecting her son, but she also needed to maintain her own political influence. As Ibrahim grew more confident as a ruler, he began making independent decisions that didn't always align with her interests. The capable prince was becoming less controllable, and for a woman who had ruled from the shadows for 30 years, this presented a dangerous shift in the balance of power. The turning point came with the execution of Kemankesh Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier who had guided Ibrahim through his successful early years. Historical accounts suggest this killing resulted from Ibrahim's growing paranoia, his learned fear that competent advisors were potential threats. With his most trusted advisor gone, the pattern was set. Competent officials would be dismissed, exiled, or executed. In their place came flatterers and sycophants, including a fraudulent mystic called Sinsi Hoka, who convinced the Sultan to make him a judge despite having no legal training. As capable advisors disappeared, so did Ibrahim's connection to reality. His most catastrophic decision came in 1645, declaring war on Venice over Crete. Every experienced military advisor counseled against it. The treasury was strained, the army unprepared. But the Sultan, influenced by his corrupt circle and deteriorating judgment, insisted. What followed was a disaster that would drain the empire for 24 years. The Venetian fleet blockaded the Dardanelles, cutting off Constantinople's food supplies. Famine spread through the capital while their Sultan retreated deeper into his palace. The harem became both his obsession and his escape from reality. He took 8 official wives, an unprecedented number that shocked even the Ottoman court. Beyond these were hundreds of concubines, filling the palace with women chosen not for beauty or intelligence, but for availability and silence. Kösem Sultan, watching her influence diminish, tried to use the harem as her remaining tool of control. She arranged for women she could influence to be brought to her son, hoping to maintain some political leverage through his appetites. But as his obsessions grew more bizarre, even this connection weakened. Foreign ambassadors began sending alarmed reports. The French nicknamed him Le Fou de Fourrures, the madman of furs. after his obsession with lining every surface with expensive sables. He sent agents throughout Constantinople searching for the fattest woman in the city, convinced that extreme obesity was the height of beauty. The real tragedy wasn't the individual acts of violence or bizarre obsessions. It was watching the systematic dismantling of an empire that had taken centuries to build. Regional rebellions erupted as governors appointed for loyalty rather than competence proved unable to maintain order. The treasury emptied as resources were squandered on failed campaigns and palace luxuries. By 1647, the empire was hemorrhaging from self-inflicted wounds. The Cretan War had become a humiliating quagmire. The economy was in freefall. Regional governors were in open revolt. At the center sat a man who had once shown such promise, now reduced to a trembling paranoid who saw enemies in every shadow and threats in every competent face. The boy who could have been great had become the monster his enemies claimed he always was. And so we return to that morning in 1647, to waters reflecting dawn light like scattered jewels, to screaming that echoed across Constantinople and then fell silent forever. The story began with a whisper. A servant claimed to see something inappropriate in the harem gardens. A concubine speaking too intimately with a guard. A glance held too long. In the poisoned atmosphere of the palace, whispers became accusations. Accusations became certainties, and certainties became death sentences. But here's where the story becomes as murky as the waters that allegedly swallowed those women. The primary account comes from Karakelebizadeh Abdulaziz Effendi, writing in his Rauda al-Ebrar. Yet this same Abdulaziz Effendi was one of the leaders of the conspiracy that would soon depose the Sultan. His account, written after the fact, served to justify what they had already decided to do: remove a mad ruler from the throne. According to his version, the Sultan's rage was immediate and total. One woman might have committed adultery, so all women must pay. The logic of a broken mind, where paranoia had replaced reason, where the innocent and guilty were equally dangerous because they were equally unknowable. The scene he describes is biblical in its horror. Women torn from their chambers in the dead of night, their screams echoing through marble corridors. Servants weeping as they carried out orders they could not refuse. Palace boats rowing into darkness, heavy with human cargo, returning empty as the sun rose. According to this account, the Sultan watched from his window, his face blank as polished marble. No emotion, no regret, no recognition of what he had done. Just the empty stare of a man whose humanity had been consumed by madness. Yet some historians question whether this massacre happened at all. They point to contradictory evidence. Turhan Sultan, one of his concubines, not only survived, but became one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. If the harem had truly been emptied in a single night of slaughter, how did she escape? They suggest the story was political propaganda, crafted to justify regicide. After all, how do you execute a ruler anointed by God? You prove he is no longer human. You create a monster so terrible that killing him becomes an act of mercy. But whether 280 women died that night or not, the story reveals something darker than any individual atrocity. It shows how easily people believed a sultan capable of such horror, how the empire had already accepted that their ruler was beyond reason, beyond mercy, beyond humanity. The real horror wasn't the massacre itself, but how the entire system had organized itself around enabling such madness. By 1647, everyone in the palace had learned the same lesson. When the Sultan's paranoia demanded victims, victims would be found. Empires can survive many things. They can survive bad harvests, military defeats, even incompetent rulers. But there is one thing no empire can survive for long: the complete loss of trust between the ruler and the ruled. And by 1648, that trust had been shattered beyond repair. The 24-year war in Crete had become a bottomless pit consuming men, money, and morale. The Venetian naval blockade had turned Constantinople into a city under siege. Ships carrying grain from Egypt couldn't reach the capital. Bread prices soared. Children starved in the streets while their sultan feasted behind palace walls lined with sable fur. The Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that formed the backbone of Ottoman military power, watched their wages disappear into endless wars and endless pleasures. These weren't ordinary soldiers who could be dismissed. They were the empire's most feared warriors, men who had toppled sultans before. When they began gathering in their barracks, sharpening weapons and speaking in angry voices, the palace should have listened. Instead, it pretended nothing was wrong. The religious authorities watched in horror as their sultan surrounded himself with charlatans and mystics. When Islamic law became secondary to a madman's whims, when justice was perverted by paranoia, they too began questioning whether this ruler deserved their support. Foreign powers, sensing weakness, began circling the empire's borders. French and Austrian diplomats reported that the Ottoman threat, which had terrified Europe for generations, was collapsing from within. Plans were drawn for territorial gains. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone knew it except the man in the palace. But it was within the palace itself that the most dangerous conspiracy was forming. And at its heart was the woman who had created the monster now threatening to devour them all. Kösem Sultan faced an impossible decision. For 33 years, she had been the empire's true ruler, maneuvering through palace intrigue with unmatched skill. She had protected Ibrahim as a child, guided him as a young sultan, and watched helplessly as he descended into madness. Now she had to choose between her maternal instincts and the empire's survival. The son she had saved from execution again and again had become the empire's greatest threat. Her political genius warred with her mother's heart, but pragmatism won. The empire was bigger than any individual, even her own flesh and blood. Her words, when she finally made her decision, were cold as winter marble. Finally, he will not let you or me live. We'll lose control of government. The whole society is in ruins. Remove him from the throne immediately. The new Grand Vizier, Sofu Mehmed Pasha, joined the plot with relief. He had watched the empire crumble under mad leadership and knew that drastic action was the only hope for salvation. The religious authorities didn't hesitate. The Sheikh ul-Islam issued the decree that sealed the Sultan's fate. In Islamic tradition, the Sultan was both political leader and Khalifa, the spiritual guardian of all Muslims. But now there were two Khalifas, the mad ruler and his young son, who had been proclaimed successor. The religious decree was clear. If there are two Khalifas, kill one. This gave them the religious cover they needed. On August 8, 1648, they struck. The Sultan was captured in his own palace, removed from the throne he had occupied for 8 years, and imprisoned in the very rooms where he had once been happy as a child. His 6-year-old son Mehmed IV was proclaimed the new Sultan, though real power would rest with the regents who had engineered this coup. For 10 days, the former ruler sat in captivity, confused and frightened, unable to understand why his world was crumbling around him just as his mind had crumbled years before. On the morning of August 18, 1648, 10 days after his world collapsed, the former Sultan was led from his prison chamber for the last time. He was 33 years old, but his body moved like that of an ancient man. The years of madness had taken their toll, leaving him frail, confused, and terrifyingly alone. The method chosen was traditional, a silk cord, the Ottoman way of executing royalty, clean, quiet, and final. As the executioners approached, his last coherent words echoed through the marble corridors. "Is there none among those who have eaten my bread that will take pity on me and protect me? These cruel men have come to kill me. Mercy, mercy." But there was no mercy left. Not from the Janissaries he had failed to pay. Not from the people he had starved with his endless wars. Not from the officials he had terrorized. And most devastating of all, not from the woman who had spent 33 years protecting him from this very fate. Kösem Sultan watched from the palace window as the silk cord tightened around her son's neck. The empire's most skilled political survivor stood silent as the man she had brought into the world left it. There was no emotion on her face, no tears, no last-minute reprieve, just the cold calculation of a ruler who had learned that empires survive by sacrificing even their own children when necessary. He died as he had lived for most of his life, a prisoner in his own palace, surrounded by luxury but deprived of freedom, betrayed by those closest to him, never understanding why the world had turned so cruel. His body was buried with minimal ceremony, unmarked and unmourned. But death revealed truths that life had concealed. When physicians examined his body, they found evidence of a man who had endured years of physical and mental anguish. The monster, it seemed, had been as much victim as perpetrator, broken by forces beyond his control. The empire he left behind was wounded, but not dead. Under his 6-year-old son, Mehmed IV, and more importantly, under capable regents, the Ottomans began a remarkable recovery. The Köprülü era brought systematic reforms that addressed the problems that had festered under mad rule. Military campaigns were planned by generals rather than mystical advisors. Economic policies were crafted by administrators who understood finance. The administrative system was rebuilt with competent bureaucrats who served the state rather than one man's whims. Within a generation, the Ottoman Empire was once again a force that made European powers tremble. The lesson was clear. The empire could survive almost anything except the complete breakdown of rational governance. When absolute power was wielded by an absolutely broken mind, the entire system corrupted itself to accommodate that madness. But when power was transferred to competent hands, when institutions functioned as designed, recovery was swift. The danger had never been in the Ottoman system itself, but in its vulnerability to the mental state of one man. When that man was strong, the empire was strong. When he was weak, everything crumbled. And when he was mad, madness became policy. His death had saved the empire he had nearly destroyed, but it had also revealed something about power itself, how easily it corrupts not through malice or greed, but through the simple human frailty of a mind unprepared for the weight it was forced to bear. This truth echoes across centuries, finding its voice in every age where power becomes a prison and the guards become as trapped as their prisoners. Look around our modern world and you'll see the same patterns playing out in different costumes. Leaders isolated in echo chambers where truth cannot penetrate, surrounded by advisors too frightened to speak honestly, making decisions based on paranoia rather than reality. We still elect broken people to unbreakable positions, still mistake the symptoms of isolation for signs of strength. The technology changes, but human frailty remains constant. Social media creates new kinds of golden cages where leaders can live entirely within constructed realities. Yes men wear suits instead of silk robes, but they serve the same function, shielding power from the uncomfortable intrusion of truth. What Ibrahim teaches us is perhaps the most uncomfortable lesson of all, that he wasn't born evil. He wasn't a monster by nature, but a man made monstrous by a system that forgot he was human. The golden cage that was meant to protect him destroyed him. The isolation that was meant to preserve him corrupted him. The power that was meant to elevate him broke him. And so we return one final time to those peaceful waters of the Bosphorus, where the morning sun still rises over a city that has seen empires rise and fall, where tour boats now carry visitors past the palace that once echoed with screams. Topkapi stands as a museum now, its rooms filled with artifacts instead of anguish. Somewhere beneath those ancient stones lies the tomb of the mad sultan, simple and forgotten, marked by no grand monument to warn future generations. But perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the lesson isn't carved in marble but written in the very air of that place, that this is what happens when power becomes a prison. In the end, the empire survived him, but 280 women did not.